So welcome back, everyone, from that quick comfort break. Just to say again, thank you so much, Sam, for such an insightful, brilliant session. Firstly, incredible to hear your personal story. Thank you for sharing that so openly. And in the way that you did, it really was very touching. But also thank you for a great for interactive, creative session. That was wonderful. It was brilliant. So today has been wonderful, and now it's time to kind of like open up the conversation. With very, obviously presentations and sharing information is really key, but actually a lot of learning and sharing and celebrating comes from kind of like open conversation. And kind of like getting, debating things and getting down into what we've heard from today. So this is your chance as an audience to ask any questions that you have for today's speakers. So Carl, Jonathan, as well as Sam. You can ask whatever questions you like. As far as I know, there are no topics off limits with anyone. So feel free to be as open as you'd like to ask a question. We're very relaxed here. Simply pop your camera and microphone on and signal to me, and I'm happy to come over to you. Or if you'd like to use the raise your hand function, you can do that in the reactions tab at the bottom, or you can pop your question in the chat box, and I'll come over to that if you're more comfortable doing that. So to get us underway, I'd like to start with a question for each of our panelists. What have you found are the biggest myths and misconceptions around dyslexia? And again, our audience, you are very welcome to chime in as well. So Carl, as our curator of today, I'm going to come over to you first for that one.
Yeah, so for me, it is that a dyslexic person is stupid. And it's all about Sally Sayworth studies that shows a dyslexic person use the right side of the brain. And the right side of the brain, it's a complete myth that a dyslexic person is stupid. The right side of the brain is, in my view, and from the studies that I've got in my book, the real gift of dyslexia. And if a parent of a dyslexic person can grasp that it's okay to struggle in the education system, but unlock your gift and you'll fly very high.
Jonathan?
Oh, hi. Yes, I think there's a bit of a myth that especially dyslexic learners in higher education always don't want to attempt to do written dissertations, 10,000 word dissertations or written assignments. That although I was talking about UDL previously and would always encourage alternative tasks to meet the learning outcomes, actually for a lot of dyslexics, they do really want to improve on their ability to write complex dissertations, but with the correct support. And also, not every dyslexic requires additional time in exams. That can be a bit of a placebo. And so, yeah, that was my little Mythbuster.
Thank you. Sam?
I think it's the myth that you aren't able to do anything or inspire to be the best you can because you're just kind of put in the back room. So I think it's going back to people feeling that you're useless, a bit stupid, maybe a bit lazy, and you use it as an excuse. And because it's a hidden disability, people can perceive you as lazy. So I suppose that's the main factors for me.
Thank you very much.
Neil,
yep.
Just before, oh yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting. I just want to mention something that Jonathan mentioned there about writing and stuff like that. So I've written 3 books. One is called The Dyslexia Code. Any dyslexic people out there or parents of dyslexic people, to write a book or you don't have to know anything about grammar or spelling or word structuring. I did an online course by Hay House, which is one of the biggest sort of spiritual self-help publishers out there. And 90% of factual books are the people writing it, even if they're non-dyslexic, they use book doctors. And I use book doctors for my books. And basically, the most important thing is, like Sam said, you just write. fixing the spelling and the grammar is easy part. You get others to do that for you.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
Sorry,
No, go for it.
Should have put my hand up. Sorry.
No.
I'll just ask a question to Jonathan. I'm not sure if he knows the answer or not. But in terms of what London South Bank University are doing to assist people with disabilities, which is fantastic work you're doing and the networks that you have, do you find that other universities are unified in working towards inclusivity, or do you find that some are better than others? I mean, you might not be able to answer that, but just thought I'd throw it out.
And anecdotally, yeah, I've also belong to a network called Yule Dog, University of London Disability Practitioners. There's a group. Yeah, I would say just about all my colleagues in the sector really want to mitigate the barriers at the get-go, meaning within curriculum design. However, I'm at South Bank, I would say I'm proud to work at South Bank. We are pretty progressive. We work with a very diverse group of students. It almost gives us the ability to think differently and work with our learners. But there are other, I would say, more Russell Group universities, and I've got colleagues that work in those universities, do have more resistance, I would say, from academic scholars that I guess it's from previous experience. Everybody does what they were done to, and maybe it doesn't a little less flexible to be creative with the delivery of their curriculum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to come in there? Megan, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I belong to the National Association of Disabled Staff Networks. I'll put the link to them in the chat, and that's a forum where we've got just most universities, but also NHS trusts and large organisations and unions, and it's all about the sort of staff experience, and it is so patchy. What you often get is commitment at senior level, so you get the right words. What for staff is they're saying the students are better supported than staff, and because you might have centres and specialist places that bring together a lot of support services for students. But for staff, it's lost in the ether of middle management, that actually what you don't get is the career progression. You don't get the support that you need. You know, I'm working with staff who it's 8 years and they still haven't got equipment that they've been told they need, and that there's the right words at most universities in terms of a statement, but it's the translation, the operation. The other thing that in the National Association for Disabled Staff Network is we're really trying to push for a charter or a framework, because we know that the Race Equality Charter and Athena Swan, which is about gender issues, has had an impact where universities have got targets and we're measured against it. There's nothing for disabilities, so therefore we can be forgotten because there's no judgment. Being cynical, vice chancellors like to talk to each other and go, look what we're doing, look what we're doing. So we actually started our own at the University of Wolverhampton because there isn't anything out there, to try and get something that is strategic, because we get picked off as individuals, and what we're getting is that dependent on your line manager will be your career experience and how you are valued or not. So I have a very supportive line manager. I'm valued for my strengths, which is the affirmation model. So I'm creative, big picture thinker, but don't get me to proofread documents. You know, yes, I do. I support a lot of doctoral students and I mark doctorates, but I have to have a way of doing it that works for me. But never give me something like a quality assurance document to read, because I don't want to do it. B, I find it boring. C, I'm not very good at it, but let me be creative. So I think those are some of the things. You've got that national strategic, perhaps university strategic, but then it gets lost in translation.
I absolutely agree with that, Megan. I think that it tends, you know, it's hard to raise awareness, and I'm chair of the local dyslexia association, and where I am, and co-chair of another network, and you just think it's raising that awareness with all the managers and the people at the top and the middle and whatever job you're in, to say, well, you know, my dyslexia is different to A, B, and C. You know, so I use orange to see my text clearer, whereas someone might use green or whatever. So it's really about raising that awareness. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Ines, we'll come over to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it really sort of comes back to raising awareness of the different methods that they are, because every dyslexic person is different from the next. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the next person. And it would be really good to, whether it's at university level or at school level and in general, that there is, you know, these are the different methods. It is very much, you know, as Carl probably had the experience and many of my colleagues, once when I read the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, it instantly resonated with me. I really felt that this is describing my child, this is how he is, yes, 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 yes. So other people do it with another method. So for me, it is really, we need to bring these methods out in the open. People need to know about what is available. And then obviously, very much as Carl says, they need to be accessible. So the more we spread the word also into schools, and let's face it, schools are a lot more lenient nowadays to accept Davis in schools than 2 or 5 years ago. The government has recognized phonics is not working for everybody. They are now very much encouraging people to use a multisensory approach. So the Davis method ticks a lot of boxes, but people need to know about it. And it needs to be part of teacher training so that these teachers actually know there is something else available for them. I mean, it's so encouraging to hear your story, Sam, that you literally from, you know, living in the street, you were picked up as somebody, okay, she's got the brain, so let's give her an opportunity. And these cases happen. I have got quite a few people that I've seen and worked with who told me exactly something like that. But it's still a minority, of course. And there are lots of people who urgently and desperately need help.
I think thank you. That's absolutely right, Ines. And I think that in terms of schools, I think some schools are better than others, and I think I work in schools, and some schools have like a tick box exercise, but what I would challenge is how's that assessed, because you need to have a professional dyslexic expert to assess people correctly, not just tick a box to say, well, I think you might be dyslexic, let's see if we can do this, because that just harks to, oh, you've got dyslexia. Oh, well, okay, everyone's the same then, so they need the same equipment, the same everything. Well, that's not how it works. Everybody's different, and their needs are different as well. So it's looking at the bigger picture and making people more aware of that picture in education from the very start. I think we need to start from that core value of people, and it should be actually in the curriculum for teacher training. I feel that disability as in a wide context, not just a hidden disability, but a wider context, to say, well, these are the potential students we're getting, this is how we can assist, rather than have this constant battle of what we can get. We're constant running, why haven't I got this, got that, etc., etc. We need to actually be proactive to say, well, actually, okay, I'm going to be on your course. What have you got for me? Ah, we've got this, rather than the other way around where, oh, what do you need? Oh, well, that's going to take 10 months. You know, so it's looking at the wider picture, I feel. So thanks.
Thank you. Tessa.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the discussion about how everybody is different, and certainly the symptoms that individuals have are very different. But I think that's a separate question to whether or not the cause of those symptoms are actually different from individual to individual. And certainly the Davis approach, the symptoms of dyscalculia and the symptoms of dyslexia are very different. But I think Ron Davis's understanding would say that the cause is common. There is a common cause to the symptoms of dyslexia, of dyscalculia, of ADHD, and to an extent it is, that same cause is linked to autism as well. And it's only when really you can recognize that you can really have a effective way of helping these individuals so that they are independent and not reliant totally on technology. Because without the spell checks, without the orange glasses, without you're stuck. And yet there is a way for an individual to be independent of those so that they can function to their absolute fullest potential and just get rid of those mistakes that everybody sees.
Thank you. Megan?
I'd like to take issue with some of the things you've just said there, Tessa. You seem to be medicalising dyslexia with symptoms and causes, rather than actually saying it's a different way of thinking, and that but by medicalising it and saying there is a cause, you're normalising against a gold standard. I don't think what I have is not a gold standard. It is different. And I think one of the problems with education is that read-write has been king for many, many years, and text-based. You know, I do a lot of research supervision, and students start off thinking they've got to do so many interviews, they have to be transcribed, they then have to be analysed to the nth degree. Where I use auto-driven photo elicitation, where participants take photographs and then discuss those photographs. I use soft systems methodology, which has rich pictures and concept maps. That's not taught because that's not the norm, whatever the norm is. So I would challenge some of the language you were using, which medicalizes and therefore has a root cause which is wrong, as opposed to, no, actually my world, once I've accepted what I am and the way I think, is wonderful, and I wouldn't want to have the same way of thinking that others do. So I think it's some of the language we use could be picked up, and therefore there is a cure, or there is a cause, there is a brain misfunction for all of those things. And I think that worries me, because then we are supporting the myth that there's something wrong with us, and I don't think there's something wrong with me.
Okay, can I defend myself there? Because absolutely, I do not wish to come across as the cause being some kind of medical issue. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of evidence to say that there is a genetic basis to dyslexia, but I do not believe that there is any kind of brain damage or weakness in terms of brain function at all. What I would say is that there is a functional difference between brains that accounts for neurodiversity. I'm not saying in any way that there is any kind of value judgment. In fact, absolutely, I celebrate the gifts, the way that a dyslexic brain functions. I celebrate how an autistic brain functions. I celebrate how an ADHD brain functions. So please don't miss, and I apologize if I've given that impression, because I absolutely celebrate that. The cause I am talking about is the way that the brain functions in terms of perceiving the world around. And if you are a visual thinker, which many dyslexics are, they have a very strong way, that's the way that their brain functions and represents the world around them, then two-dimensional letters, when you are perceiving your world three-dimensionally, will cause a problem, will cause, and you are likely, and it explains why a dyslexic will perhaps have letters that move, letters that flip, and certainly struggles to understand words which don't have an easily visualized meaning. Tyrannosaurus, dog, aeroplane, tractor are words that a dyslexic child can usually read, but it's those functional words, is, at, what, there, to, that they struggle with, because there is no obvious visual meaning of those words. And so there you have those symptoms of misreading, mishearing, misunderstanding the text that an individual has read. The cause is a natural response that they have to confusion.
Can I just say, it's Carl here, that this whole thing about label, words being used. So the term is we've got a learning disability. That needs to change to a learning difference, in my view, or some other word like that, because a guy that I admire a lot, and he was also taught he was not going to function in life by his teacher, and he went out of school at age 14. There's a guy called John DeMartini, and he's now written something like 50 books, and he's one of the world's top behavioral experts. But John was cleaning the weeds in his front garden, and the next door neighbor, elderly lady, sort of looked over the fence and said to him, John, you need to plant more flowers, because if you plant more flowers, there won't be any weeds. So, in today's society, you've got this dummies books. They've got different dummy books. And there's one book called Dyslexia for Dummies. That is, because of affirmations are so powerful, that is a negative affirmation that's unbelievable. I'm sure maybe the company doesn't recognize what they're doing. But to have a book called Dyslexia for Dummies is absolutely the worst thing a dyslexic person wants. So just a little bit on side on that.
No, I agree with that. A terrible term. What I was going to say, maybe just as an aside, was when I'm submitting work to be published to theatres or book publishers, etc. Sometimes I've had work rejected. They've liked the content, but they say, oh, it's not in chronological order. Oh, despite the fact that I put on the end of my submission, please be aware the person is dyslexic. They use software to assist, and that doesn't seem to resonate. So, I could have work that is rejected because it's not in the correct format, or I've misunderstood the guidance or something like that, which has happened quite a few times. I've then had to email people to say, can you explain what you mean by what the guidance is? So that's been quite challenging, and I found that quite difficult. Some people have been really good, like when I did Edinburgh, they've got a fantastic team there, and they helped with the application form and all that sort of stuff, because I really struggled and I felt terrible because I kept ringing them up literally every other day, and it's first name terms, really. They held like a help desk. But they were very good, but some aren't as good, and some aren't interested. So if you haven't got the grammar right, they're not interested. Whereas my grammar's never going to be right, really. It's what it is. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there, see if anyone else has had similar experiences of that.
Megan?
Yeah, I absolutely have had the same experience. I wrote an article for actually a journal about widening participation, and they came back, and I put I co-authored with somebody who identified on the autistic spectrum. We did flip learning from two different perspectives, a dyslexic person's perspective and of somebody on the autistic spectrum. There was quite brutal comments about some of the grammar and spelling. And I did point out that, we were dyslexic, and could we turn the article around in a week? And I went back, you're supposed to be a journal about widening participation. You've been told, that I'm dyslexic. It needs to be proofread. And they did apologise, and they said, we've never even thought about the feedback that we actually give, and there's no guidelines to reviewers about you know, if somebody says they're dyslexic, what kind of feedback? So I went down the professor of learning and teaching route rather than research professor, because I couldn't, it took me back to that 11-year-old child being told that you're careless or you're stupid or you make silly mistakes. And I think there's a lot in higher education where publishing, inverted commas, journal articles is the god, is brutal, and I don't want to put myself into that. So I chose a route that respected presentations, different research outputs than journals, which I don't find books as bad because you've got a longer term to work with somebody, but journals really need to do something about their inclusivity for authors, because it's so brutal, it's horrible.
I agree, and maybe that's where we have to start reaching out and talking to people and saying, what can we do to assist? Because I'd like to believe that there's no malice. I think it's just ignorance and not enough awareness maybe about certain things. It's like, for example, the same principle would apply if somebody arranged an event and there was, 100 steps to climb and you've got a wheelchair and no access. It would be exactly the same scenario, or the disabled toilet doesn't work and you've got to find a key or something, or no one's there to give you a cup of coffee. So it's just making people think about what they are doing and raising that awareness in the bigger wide world, really, I think, as a whole.
Thank you. Carl?
Yeah, so the butterfly effect is massive. Fortunately, in my book, The Universe Code, I give the reason for that. But I believe that the string in string theory is the same as the God particle they found in CERN. And so all we made up is just vibrating strings. And, in a string, if you look at an atom, you look at a string in the size of an atom, and you compare it, say the string is the size of a tree, the atom is the size of the solar system. So these strings are so minute, we'll never see it. Now, because of the strings, we're all interconnected. And this is the power, if you pray or something like that, groups can make things change because we're all interconnected. Don't believe in the butterfly effect. If there's every parent there now that go into your school on Monday morning or whatever, and it's going to take about a week or two to get these videos up, send them the video clips, make your change, believe in the butterfly effect, believe in the duplicating snowball effect.
It's raising, I agree with that, Carl, but it's raising the wider issues here. There was a recent court case about this lady, it was all in the press, about this lady who was deaf, who took the government to court because there was no signers when they were doing the COVID briefings. And it's just simple things like that. They didn't have any provisions for deaf or hard of hearing people. And she took them to court and won. Yet the Welsh government, the Scottish government had signers from the off, but the British government didn't. And I just think if we're not listening at that level, then we've got a really big mountain to climb to get everybody inclusive and equal in this world, basically, or just in the UK to start with. There's lots of countries that are doing a lot better than we are, and we need to wake up to that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like tomorrow, I'm off to COP26 in Glasgow. I'm a big climate freak as well. And so many people are now suing their governments for, people that die of asthma and stuff like that. We all just need to get active and make change.
We need, sorry, can I just say, we need so much more better funding for universities and teacher training. If teachers were taught and were given more flexibility to meet the needs of their neurodiverse pupils, then so many more adults would be so happy, so much more happy. They would not have to go through, years of therapy. They would not feel that they were undervalued, because those differences in the way that they think and learn. If you have a child that is thinking differently, you have to teach them differently because they're learning differently. And teachers don't have that flexibility, and they don't have the basic understanding of how children learn, how anybody learns. And that needs to change massively.
Thank you. We're going to come back. We're going to come back over to that as our next kind of like core theme to focus on, actually, Tessa. Ines and Megan, before we do so, we'll come to you because you've both got your hands raised.
Well,
so
I might jump the gun here because it was in addition to what Tessa was just saying, learning differently. I mean, Carl, I liked what you said. The one thing that I stumbled over where I feel a little bit nervous about is if you're saying this has taken 10 hours and it is possible in 10 hours. It might be possible. I do not know. It obviously worked for your daughter, and that is absolutely great. However, the majority of dyslexic people will need around 30 hours. And that is, it is not enough to understand something. If we show a child how their brain works and they understand it, they still need to practice, because otherwise they go back into school like with any other intervention. They will be taken out of school for half an hour, then they get thrown back into the pond and they're expected to do what everybody else is. They then forget that there is a Davis tool. If I work with a child for, and it doesn't have to be a week, but the single sessions, there in general, I can tell you that from experience, they will not work as well as doing it on a block. So I would suggest at least 3 hours per day, and then over, let's say, 10 days, something like that. Then you really set the child up so that the child will know, this is how my brain works, this is what I need to do when I work out whether it's my math or my writing, and so on and so on. So I'm not saying, you know, it's not possible, but your child might not be as dyslexic as perhaps somebody else is. So the experience is definitely across the board that it does take longer than 10 hours. I think that is a little bit misleading, and I would be just careful, because what I don't want is that people ring me up, say, okay, I want to book these 10 hours, and then they don't get the results, and that is how Davis then gets a bad name. So I'm coming from that angle.
Yeah, so my daughter, she was taking psychologist, and she was defined, you know, the report as a mild dyslexic. So yeah, as you say, and no, there's no two dyslexics are exactly the same. The sister Antoinette did it in 12 weeks, 1 hour, and she did it. Now, after that 12 hours, my daughter was flying. Now, it might take another dyslexic 24 hours, whatever. What I've got against the week-long program, it has cost so much that I think making it elitist, it's putting 95% of society against it. What would be far better is to say, okay, let's start with 3 hours then. And then we have 3 hours this week, 3 hours next week, 3 hours the following week. And then you pay per 3 hours. I paid Sister Antoinette. I lost my property. I didn't have the Davis facility money, but I didn't even know about the week-long program. And that way the child, the parent can afford it, because they don't have to fork out this huge amount of money. Secondly, after that first 3 hours, if the dyslexic child don't want to proceed, because it's all about them, it's about them earning, they need to want to do it. As you know, this is the first thing Sister Antoinette said to my daughter, do you want to do it? So after that 3 hours, if they don't want to do it, they can decide not to do it. It's keeping
they can do it anyway.
So I don't, if you pay your clients back for the money they've come up with or whatever, but I just think there's the way I see it in the future is, as we discussed, I see dyslexia Davis facilitators working in the schools. Fortunately, there's more young people coming in, and I'm hoping that more Davis facilitators working in school. And instead of taking my daughter or someone else's daughter or son out of, say, the history class, I think it's terrible to be taken out of the history class, because then you make it worse for the dyslexic person. But when they've got religious education or PT or what, physical education, and it's 2 to 3 hours or 1 hour, whatever, Sister Antoinette could do it within 1 hour. she
You could do it with your daughter.
With my daughter. Now,
Yeah, so you know that is a big difference because we can't generalize it. That's all I'm saying. I totally get it what you're saying, and I agree with you. I wouldn't want it to be elitist. We do have a bursary fund now, which is not enough, I know, and I would love it to go into schools. You know, I'm really sort of pushing on that. So we are very much on the same page. It is just, you know, I don't want people to feel, yeah, I can get this for 10 hours and then it's not quite sort of working, and that would be sad.
I fully agree with that. And my daughter was mild, so I fully take that point.
Yeah.
I just believe, and I know the Davis method, if they change the structure a bit and make it more easily for people to start fitting in and doing it a small amount of monies, and then you say it might continue for a year.
Could I? Sorry, could I just interrupt? There are a number of things. Firstly, there are the Davis learning strategies which have been incorporated in schools. Sadly, not within only within a couple of schools. I think within this country, private schools, but in India, it's really beginning to take off, and there is one school in Chennai that has fully incorporated Davis within its curriculum, and they have little or no special needs referrals as a result. So incredibly successful out there. So it is certainly, there are certainly ways of incorporating the Davis methods within a school curriculum. So that's number one. In terms of costs, there are also other courses that are available to parents and to teachers that address some of the confusions with words without using, as you mentioned, and I don't know if anybody else is interested in the mind's eye. And Sister Antoinette taught your daughter how to control and use her mind's eye. But there's a 12-week course available to parents for something around 120, 150 pounds. It's an online course called Why Tyrannosaurus But Not If. And that will certainly allow a dyslexic parent to go a long way to supporting their child with their homework using the modeling and the clay approach. So there are different ways, but Ines is absolutely right. For most dyslexic clients, and certainly all the adults that I have worked with and many of the children, they absolutely benefit from the intensive 30-hour course, because it gives them all the tools and the skills to enable them to be an independent learner and to continue to address the, I'm going to put inverted commas, mistakes, but the issues that they have with their reading, their writing, their spelling, post-program independently. So the 30 hours is essential, really, to be able to give them that complete independence.
Thank you, Tessa. Megan, and then Sam, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Okay, I think there's just a couple of things I really want to highlight. First of all, nothing about us without us. Don't treat me as an object that can be cured or can be treated in some way. And I think that worries me with some of the governmental things, that where are the people who happen to have dyslexia, or where are the people with disabilities who are advising the government? And I think there is a real issue for almost coming out. And we talked about sort of LGBTQ plus, in that when I came out to my students that I was dyslexic, because I realized that I was putting mistakes on the board, they could still read it. There was a difference in how they treated me, but I was scared that it would impact on my career, and it would impact on how others saw me. And I don't think we can underestimate what that means, and having role models where people are talking not about me, not the dyslexic parent. I'm a parent, my kids have got dyslexia, but I'm not a dyslexic parent. I'm a parent first, the way I learn, I have dyslexic traits. They have, all three of us are completely different. So labels, language, the way that we are othered is a concern, but that also then means you do have to step out. And I think it is important that you do get the role models such as Sam, who talk about their life experience. I also think, and I was listening to people talking about a number of hours, and I know you weren't talking about curative and different ways of work, but it's a language that I sometimes worry about. My kids went to school that had a specialist centre for dyslexia. Some of the things they did was allow them to use mobile phones. So when I was at school, copying down from the board, I was like, by the time I got a word down, the next word came up and I lost it. Just being able to take a photograph of the board didn't mean to say that I was anyway othered. And other children going, can I do that too? Because the way that we traditionally teach, like, you've got to copy from the board. Why can't I take a photograph of that? And why isn't that good for everybody? And I think this is where we say things like no mobile phones, because we think it's about making phone calls, and actually it's about enabling people to learn differently. That I could take an image of something. So you talk about Tyrannosaurus Rex. If I take a picture of it, that picture is there with that word. And I think it is about the inclusivity, that what is good for dyslexic people can be good for all. And if we are then just labeling people as saying, and this is where I have a real struggle with read write being dominant for so long in all education settings, and that actually online learning has been phenomenal because I have conceptual reversal. If I don't read something beforehand, and if I don't understand it beforehand, I can listen to something and be 180 degrees opposite to what I'm actually hearing, but I've read it the way I think it's being put across. So having materials before I do something, having the ability to engage and find the words, find the patterns, look up a picture of a word so I have the hook for it. Online learning followed up by peer-to-peer interaction has enabled me to work to learn more effectively. The sad thing is we're going to lose that and go back to read write, and so I do think we need to actually be challenging. So I think packed in all of that is not about us without us. So if you're not including me, I'm not interested, because you're talking about me rather than with me, and I think that's absolutely key. People coming out and being role models and actually going, no, I'm challenging you to why you're using this language, why you're treating me in this way, and then not losing what the good things that we've lost from lockdown, and for a blended online approach. So those are kind of just some comments.
No, I absolutely agree with everything you said, Megan. I think what you said is brilliant, and I use right, and it always crashes, unfortunately. Not always, but sometimes it's irritating. Sometimes spell check is quicker than read and write. But what I was going to say in terms of the courses, and coming back to some of what Tessa kindly said about the Davis work that she's doing, and some of the courses. Here in Kent, we just launched a neurodiversity course at the local college, which is about 20 weeks. I think that's about a 5-month course, and it leads to an NVQ qualification, and it covers all neurodiversity, so autism, dyslexia, and it's a course to encourage businesses and educators to go on, so that they have a bigger picture and an awareness of, if they are teaching someone who is, got dyslexia or whatever the situation is, that they can be fully supported and can look out for the signs. Because I'm sure most of us here have had some horror stories, and it's nice to have some nice stories rather than horror stories. And if we can change, 10 people or one person, we're doing a good job. And also what's important is some of the courses or the assessments, and it's really lovely to hear that South Bank University do free assessments. But in terms of if you're outside that institution and you have to get an assessor, it can be £700, which is a huge amount of money for most people, and it's not inclusive of social mobility groups in society. So that needs to be addressed. And furthermore, the cultural aspect. I gave a presentation. Was a guy from where was he from? Somalia or West Africa, and he said that he'd been punishing his son because he thought he was lazy. Actually, he had dyslexia, and once he knew that he had dyslexia, he was absolutely supportive and wanted to know all about it. So I gave him as much information as possible. And I think it's welcoming to look at reaching out to community engagement with all the communities in our society to raise all those awarenesses so that people can be included and supported where they need it. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So next question, and we've touched on this, and I think the answer to it actually is across the board money, but what more can be done to improve the provision of dyslexia support? So emotional support, digital poverty, comorbidity with other things such as autism, and healthcare, and actually particularly when it comes to dyslexia in adults. Jonathan, I'll come to you first.
I thought you were going to jump on me there. quick thinking. Yeah, we do notice students that receive a diagnosis of dyslexia as an adult learner. It can be a bit of a shock for a lot of our students, also from different cultural backgrounds from the UK. That actually we have a very good wellbeing team. Disability and dyslexia team work closely with the wellbeing team, and we do a lot of referral to the wellbeing team for students who are very anxious about their forthcoming assignments, about the exam, and as well as coming to terms with them being neurodiverse. And for some students from different ethnic backgrounds, it can be quite a stigma, and it's not empowering, or they're taking time to get used to that. So we do provide sort of opportunities for them to sort of come to terms with that and to see it as a strength, but not originally. They don't originally see it as a gift. Yeah.
Thank you. Carl?
Yes, so you've got all this, what we've discussed today, society needs to change, the education system. The biggest thing I think is, and I think it's Tessa or Ines mentioned Chennai in India, where there's now they're using the Davis method in the school. That's the way forward, and Davis facilitators, because it's a method. If the questionnaire, the mind's eye, and the play shapes, that keeps the right brain gift, and it makes dyslexic people cope in the educational system. And just the payment method. I understand all this, that I saw a note that you pay over 6 months or whatever, but it's just making it less expensive for people. I want to unlock 95% of people that can currently not cope, and a bursary is not good enough. There needs to be a shift in I would say, if 1 hour is not enough, because my daughter was mild dyslexic, make it 3 hours per week, and then maybe say just 2-3 hours per month, so a parent can afford it. It's all about affordability. I think that Davis's method is not being utilized. The most brilliant method out there, in my view, complementary method, is not utilized because of the system, how payment is set up, and that to me is a travesty.
Sure. So make it more accessible and affordable. Yeah,
absolutely.
Sam?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Making it more accessible, as I've mentioned just a moment ago, because there's so many people that are probably undiagnosed because they're too frightened to know how to pay for it. And if there's no grants or anything available, I noticed that it says that Davis facilities, they can arrange a payment, but some people are really below the poverty line. They don't even have a bank account, or they can't get a bank account. So how do we address that? And looking at how we can actually support people. And I know that the British Dyslexia Association were talking about maybe having some bursary type grant have free assessments. and that maybe will be a step forward. I can't remember the rest of the question, Neil, sorry. What was the first?
It was just around addressing, improving the provision of dyslexia support, so emotional, digital poverty, comorbidity, and healthcare.
Yeah, I think well-being is really important, because it's a lot of people with dyslexia, and I was one of them, feel stigmatized and not welcome in society, because we're always a sort of person sitting at the back of the class. But I want it to be that people are sitting in the front of the class and feel supportive. And I think with institutions such as universities and colleges and schools, they should have those provisions in terms of digitalisation to assist, and also looking at what can assist. For example, I've got something called, I think it's Mind Map, where you basically have a word and then it gives you ideas and you can click on, and that really helps in terms of planning things for me. It's only just been installed, so I'm new at it. But also the fact that you can celebrate who you are. Don't be labelled, don't be judged. Celebrate who you are as a person, because otherwise you'll end up with serious mental health problems and you won't get that job you've dreamed of. And I think it's about raising that support and awareness to assist those.
It comes back to representation as well, doesn't it? And Megan, you touched on role models earlier. Carl, you started off your talk today with kind of like listing people from history and current people today who are dyslexic. So all of that matters. Dr. Ronk says you cannot be what you don't see, and that is so important. Ines, we'll come over to you for a comment, and then we'll throw it open to last questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think one of the things is the government is not even addressing children in secondary schools any longer. They just say it has to happen in primary, and they're no longer financially supporting it in secondary. That's a big mistake.
Yeah.
In Norfolk, coming to assessments, we haven't even got somebody who can assess after COVID. People who did it didn't relicense. There's no provision whatsoever. There is, however, I work also as a coach with people with neurodiversity. And Megan did say, we're talking about, we're talking at people, we're using words like diagnosed, which again indicate that there's something wrong, that there's an illness, which we don't want. A Genius Within, this is a company that I'm involved with, they say we have identified as being dyslexic, which is slightly different, and neurodiverse is a key word, and systemic. We have to be inclusive for absolutely everything. And my experience is with these are companies who ring this Genius Within company up, say, we've got Mr. X, he's excellent in, let's say, sales, or is a great doctor, but his paperwork is awful, time management not there, and so on and so on. Fact is that in workplaces, it is more and more recognized and accepted that there are people who are neurodiverse, and they really are keen to get the right help for them. And for the people in question who are neurodiverse, it's a great relief very often to know why they can't do anything, why they are behind with paperwork or whatever. Sometimes they didn't have a clue that they are dyslexic, for example, and they suddenly have got a reason, oh, my brain works differently, so nice to know about it. And we're working very much so, what is your strength? We will want your strengths to work in your favor. So there's a lot of movement in different areas for grown-ups and also for children. But yeah, there's still a long way to go before we are in schools. But that's what we should do.
Thank you. We are running, we're slightly running over now. So no, not at all. Sam, we'll come over to you, and then we're going to start wrapping up.
just a quickie, really. It was, I take what Ines has said, really interesting points. I sometimes attend the All-Parliamentary Parliament Committee on Learning, Committee on Dyslexia, and that's run by Lord Addington, and Sharon Hodgson is the MP, Labour MP for Sunderland. And with all the years I've been going to this event, there's only been 2 MPs that have turned up. So I think we need to really go to our MPs and say, why aren't you attending these meetings? What impact, what can you do? You need to learn about all these things at the core government level. Otherwise, we're still going to have issues and problems. And the fact that dyslexia doesn't seem to be recognised in secondary school in terms of the training or the assessors, there's no chance then for adults. I was diagnosed as an adult, so just because of the difficulties, and it's frightening that we're just abandoning a whole generation of young people who can be so much more, you know, that they don't have to be defined by their dyslexia, and they can say what they want to do and what they want to be. If they want to be a judge, be a judge. If you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. Do what you want to do. Disability, there should be no barriers to your career development and progression in your life. You should be treated equally like anybody else. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So if there are no more comments, oh, Caroline's just popped in. A diagnosis is not necessary before undertaking a Davis program. Also, is not usually necessary for years of private tuition, as in that may be considered cost effective. After years working in state primary schools, I find the Davis method so refreshing and brilliant. I've also done the weekend course of primary school teachers. Thank you for sharing that, Caroline. Megan?
Just like a final comment, really, and it was touched on about intersectionality. I'm supervising a student doing their doctorate about Caribbean boys and how they are not diagnosed for autism, and she's been doing some research about how many people who are dyslexic are in prisons, or how many people who are in prisons are dyslexic, and actually for example in some cultures, and she's from that culture, she said, you know, that they schools say, or they're just being loud Jamaicans, they're just being introvert Jamaicans. Not actually is something going on. It's an assumption that somebody is acting in a particular way because of that cultural group. So there's a misdiagnosis with certain cultural backgrounds, because it's the cultural background, not the fact that somebody might have a neurodiverse background. So I think that intersectionality, there was a program, and I can't remember it, I think it was on Channel 4, which we were using in staff development, was seen as a race. It was actually about a young black lad in the 70s in a school not being diagnosed with dyslexia, but was actually seen as mentally retarded, though he was dyslexic, and it was put forward as an issue about race. I went absolutely cold, because the lad, as some other people were saying, was reading out aloud and being mocked by his fellows. Now that took me back to my school days, and I think the people had missed the intersectionality. They saw it as a program about race. I saw it about a program for disability, and I sometimes think we can miss out that notion that, you know, like dyslexia, oh, there's more boys than girls. Well, there's only this week about with autism that women are underdiagnosed because they mask it. And I think there's a whole discussion about that intersectionality. So I'm gonna leave it there.
No, well, intersectionality is always key when discussing anything at the moment, Megan. And I think we're possibly on to our next event there with if you're on board. So do stay tuned. We'll keep you posted. Right, okay, very keen to wrap up because it is Saturday, and I know everyone's sat here for a long morning with us. So in terms of kind of like, it does seem there's progress, that there's movement in this. You said there's movement, but there are clearly gaps, particularly around provision and assessment in secondary schools. The emphasis on the need for inclusive approaches and languages across the board, not just in education and academia, but generally. And this has really been a celebration of dyslexia as it was today. You know, Sam, I think you really reflected that pride, that sense of owning it. A friend of mine ends every email with I am delightfully dyslexic, so please kind of expect mistakes. And so I think that that's really kind of like, you know, you and what everyone's talked about is that feeling of celebration and seeing it as a gift. So thank you everyone for today. I'm just going to hand over to our main speakers for closing words. They can be words of advice or inspiration, putting you on the spot slightly, but just to bring our event to a close. So Jonathan, we'll come to you first.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And it is a celebration. I think it's just the big, we should celebrate more. And I just see great things happening in the future in higher education, but it is just the beginning.
Thank you. Sam?
Well, what can I say? If you if you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. Don't settle for second best. And I think you have to have the positive aspect to look at your career development. Don't let anybody put you down. Don't you know, dyslexia is who you are. It's what you are. Don't let anybody judge you, and just be your best and be positive, and you can conquer the world. Is what I want to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sam and Jonathan. Thank you to our audience. It's been a wonderful morning. I'm going to hand over to the person behind all of this for closing words, and that's Carl.
Thank you, Neil. Yes, all I would like to say, for my book, The Universe Code, for my dyslexia code book, it was 6 months of research. My Housepring code was 6 months further. The Universe Code was 7 years of research. The most important thing I discovered there is the truth will set us free. And I just live a truthful life, and it's one of the reasons why I'm now divorced, unfortunately. But the truth is, dyslexic people are right brain-minded. Studies have shown it. And the truth is, there's a brilliant method called the Davis's method that Ron Davis discovered. We just need to make it affordable for every person, and spread, in my view, spread it a little bit. And yes, but just live a truthful life and be proud to be dyslexic and own it, and then your life will change.
And thank you, Neil, and thank you to everybody who's attended, and thank you, Carl and Jonathan. It's been lovely to see you all, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks, everyone. It's a great event. And we'll see you, hopefully see you all soon. And we'll ping you an evaluation form just after this. And as soon as the links are ready, we'll share those. Megan, I'm sure we'll be in touch. And if anyone wants to keep in touch, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.